Welcome to The Cow Behind the Barn, a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine as experienced and interpreted by an artist. I'm Kevin Caldwell, a co-founder of the Table Collective. I decided to title this episode, The Nature of the Universe in the Poetry of Quantum Physics, and I know that may take some explanation. I hope it'll get clear later in the episode. Way back in the second episode, when I asked the question, where and when did I begin, little did I know the journey it would take us, on. It's been a very personal journey, back to my childhood and pre-childhood, my family history, my entanglement with people and places. It's been a spiritual journey. The question drew me back into the spiritual wisdom of the so-called Eastern and Western religious streams, the Gita, Buddha's teaching, the Tao Te Ching, Genesis, John, the Quran. And I've not only explored the texts, but have frequently paused for meditation, contemplative silence, and what some traditions would refer to as listening prayer. The theme of what I have called entanglement, while described differently in these rivers of wisdom, is prevalent in them all and has been impacting me deeply. It's been an intellectual journey. I've discovered new insights and concepts in this process, insights and information about places, indigenous peoples, religious heritages, psychological and spiritual realities, and in particular, information and insights relative to what for me is a new field of inquiry, quantum physics. In fact, that's where the term entanglement first came to me. Prior to that, I tended to speak of interconnection. Having said that, I have extended usage of entanglement as a term in ways that physicists do not, since I speak about psychic as well as physical interconnection. And by no means am I suggesting that physicists would agree with my extension. It's also been an artistic journey. The question, where and when did I begin, drew me into describing my discoveries and ways of seeing the world as an artist through the lenses of my own music and poetry. And also, that includes how I processed quantum physics. And more on that as we proceed. At every point along the journey, I've had a growing sense of awe and wonder and curiosity in the face of the vast, expansive, mysterious, surprising, and, as I'm more and more discovering, counterintuitive world we inhabit. Ironically, it's been my delving into the world of science, physics in particular, which has most surprised me. It's not unusual for people to assume that the arts and religion and the intuitive wisdom of meditation don't correspond with the hard facts of science. The irony is that it's been my digging into the work of scientists that is most responsible recently for revealing to me how different the world really is from what we assume it to be. Nothing is what it seems. In fact, it's clear to me that the universe, as seen through the lenses of quantum physics, very closely resembles the universe as seen through the lenses of the religious heritages I've been exploring. The task I had originally set for myself in this episode was to describe quantum ways of seeing the world, and then compare that to the several religious heritages I've brought to the table, and then to summarize the way I see all these voices singing together, whether in harmony or discordantly, by presenting my current conclusions about it all. But as I've been preparing to record the episode, I've had the growing realization that it can't be done in one episode. And that's not the first time this has happened during the podcast. Quantum physics has so much to say about the questions that I've been asking. Is the stuff the world is made of eternal? Are there multiple worlds? How does quantum entanglement affect everything? And as such, this whole episode will be needed to let that quantum voice be heard. But then how? How to go about it? As I kept digging more fully into quantum theories of the universe, doing so as an artist, which is, by the way, what my podcast description says the podcast is all about, after all, this meant that I was intentionally engaging my artistic imagination as I considered implications of what I was learning about. So I'm going to experiment here. I'm going to begin with an artistic presentation of quantum physics in the form of a poem that I've been working on. And I'll follow that then with a summary of what I've learned in my research. And then I'll come back to the poem. A poem I call Rippling Skies. I turn my eyes. The sky ripples, canopy of lights glowing, red, growing, slowing, dying, already dead. Seeds in the cinders of stars, worlds of worlds in an ember. Every pregnant ash, a fullness of empty vastness, a point of ripening intensity, density of verdant heat, explosive power. Every burst births a cycle, expanding, despanding, unspanding, respanding, expanding again, universes begetting universes. Beside, within, before, after are the words that we agree to use, as if we know. Words are flotsam, floating atop inscrutable, unfathomable seas, teeming with creatures frolicking with gleeful disregard for the laws of our pragmatic, reassuring, necessary grammar. But really? Really? Every world is a where with no there, and a there with no where, in a when with no then, a then with no when. We live as we live because we must live as if we live in place and time, with these people and plants and pets and problems, as if all of this in fact works the way it seems to work, the way we need it to work, need to believe it works in order to set foot outside a door on a winter morning or to see and name in wonder a setting sun. Because this is the only way I can live, as this I who lives this way. But really? Really? I carry in myself and am myself carried by. Universes begetting universes. Expanding, despanding, unspanding, respanding, expanding again. Every burst birthing in a cycle, a density of verdant heat, explosive power, a point of ripening intensity, a fullness of empty vastness. Every pregnant ash, worlds of worlds in an ember. Seeds in the cinders of stars, already dead. Slowing, dying, red, growing, a canopy of lights glowing in the rippling sky. I turn my eyes. Well, human beings have been telling stories about the world for as long as there have been human beings. Physicists are also, it so happens, storytellers. And while I've done a lot of research, and there are many hours of work behind what I'm about to present, I'm going to approach this as if quantum physics were a novelist, the narrator of a story, an author who is talking about a novel they've written, sharing their insights into the plot and characters of the book. Now, in this story, the world and the things in it are the main characters. The plot line is the story of how it all came to be. In the world, our author describes no thing in the world is what that thing is until that thing is experienced by another character in the story. Okay, but author, prior to being experienced, what is that thing? And what is it doing? Our author might reply, well, a thing might be anything before it is the thing we experience it to be. Our author is also quick to admit that this is all counterintuitive, counter to how we actually experience the world. Albert Einstein is reported to have asked a colleague something to the effect of, but do you really believe the moon isn't there until we look at it? Whatever his science was telling him, his practical experience suggested something else. In addition, each thing is somehow connected with, entangled with, every other thing. Not just nearby things or proximate things, but things separated by vast distances as well. But are things the only characters in this novel? Even assuming that I'm using thing to include, well, everything, like sentient beings, is there anything else? Let me introduce another character in the novel, matter. It turns out that only 5% of the universe is made up of stuff we can see, measure, touch, like planets, stars, galaxies. That leaves 95% of the universe that cannot be sensed, as it were, with our conventional instruments or senses, leading our author to name this character in the story dark matter, a metaphor. That brings us to the plotline. How did such a world come to be? The story is set initially in a universe that, until quite recently, has been assumed to be something fixed for all eternity, in which time runs from the infinite past to the infinite future with very little changing in between. However, in a major plot twist, that static picture of the cosmos was destroyed by evidence of distant galaxies which were, we might say, in flight. Notice the metaphor. The plot twist was in large degree instigated by improvements in the telescope, which provided more and more accurate detail about the universe. As a result, a new myth, we might say, emerged. The idea that the universe is not static and everlasting. It began at a point in time with a big bang and is expanding. I say myth because that word refers to describing something true and real, but with the use of metaphor, story, imagination. For example, there was no bang because there were no properties for sound. And it wasn't big, literally, because the conditions that enable us to compare dimensions did not yet exist. This must all be described in narrative, and so as myth. And so, as it happens, science needs art to describe its conclusions. We may be tempted to ask the author, well, what was before that bang? Before the explosion? Before the singular point of infinite density and temperature that expanded into what we call the universe? In other words, was there a prequel to your novel? Now, asking about before already implies something about time. But in the world of our author, time isn't what we think it is. Time runs at different speeds, for one thing, and only came into being as the result of that bang, which expanded towards its current size and shape. And since we currently lack the means to directly observe what existed before the Big Bang, our author would probably reply simply, I don't know, to the question about what was before. I know by experience that that is very common for artists like this novelist to not fully understand their own work. But if our author were to speculate, they might posit several possible ideas for the prequel to this novel about our world as we now know it. One possible prequel is that our universe bubbled off from a parent universe, that the singular compressed thing that went bang and began a rapid explosive inflation was but one of an endless progression of inflationary bubbles, each becoming a universe, and each of these birthing even more inflationary bubbles in an immeasurable multiverse, each bubble ripe with explosive power. This plotline also suggests that in that first big push of inflation after the bang, different parts of the space-time world grew at different rates. To be clear, we're speaking here of different universes, which have been, as it were, carved off, with each universe existing with potentially different laws of physics. Bubbles and pocket universes, sections. Notice the use of language. No one thinks that there's literal pockets or bubbles, but what other words does the storyteller have at hand? This is metaphor, myth, and art. The story is more like poetry than we might have assumed at the beginning. It's also possible that not only are there other bubbles and pockets, other universes now, but also that before the Big Bang, this universe has gone through an infinite series of expansions and contractions. In other words, not only a single Big Bang, but big bangs followed by what some call big crunches, which occur at the point when gravity pulls everything together, crunching it, as it were, all into a vast black hole. Indeed, in this version of the prequel, our universe has been born inside a black hole, and every black hole in the universe may contain separate universes as well. If new worlds are birthed, or banged, as it were, from black holes, then our world is made up of elements formed deep within the cores of worlds long dead. As the British astronomer Sir Martin Rees, another storyteller, we might say, puts it, we are literally the ashes of long dead stars. Bangs, crunches, black holes. Nothing actually went bang, and nothing crunched. There's no hole, and it isn't black. These are all metaphors, nor are these the only metaphors for a possible prequel. Some propose, for example, speaking of the cycle of bang and crunch as big bounces instead of bangs and crunches. Notice the way that every metaphor also smuggles in other metaphors. So a big bang suggests an explosion, which is a misleading image, because in an explosion there's an expansion as well. Fragments are flung outward from a central point into a pre-existing space. But the bang was not an expansion within a space that was already there. It was the beginning of space itself. Indeed, it was the beginning of what we might call spaceness. There was no space or spaceness prior to that bang. And in using the word outward, we have had to smuggle in another metaphor, because there was no geographic point to go outward from. There was no there yet. There-ness came to be at the same moment as everything that was, well, there. Speaking of metaphors, there's another one that caught my attention. Light. Light's a metaphor? Well, in a way, yes, because some physicists speak of light existing before the bang, though light as we know it could not exist before the Big Bang. True, the energy that would later manifest as light is believed to have been present in the extremely dense singularity that preceded the Big Bang expansion as the precursor, we could say, to light, but it's common to speak of that potentiality, I should say, for light, as if it were light itself. And that's very close to being a metaphor. And I wanted to mention light because, as I describe it in a prior episode, it's a major theme in the religious heritages, and it provides one way, at least, of comparing what all these voices at the table are talking about. I'll come back to that in the future. My point with all this talk of metaphors is that explaining science is a form of art, a genre all its own, and I hope along the way I've also communicated something of what physicists tell us. The reality is that what our author, physicists sort of as a whole, is describing surpasses the ability of language to express without resorting to metaphor and analogy. One reason is that language is inherently metaphorical, almost never literally true. That's a topic for a whole different day and probably a different podcast. Another reason is that while physicists must by necessity talk about origins and how things work, the reality is there's no comprehensive theory fully explaining things like time and gravity. Thus, scientists are forced to use language without, in one sense, knowing what it means. And that's more like what a poet does than what we normally think of as the work of the scientist. I once defined poetry as using language to do what language can't do. Physicists ask questions like, what happened before? But they don't know what time is and how it functions. They speak of expansions and contractions of the universe, but we don't really know what space and place mean. So they have to use language to say things that is in many ways impossible to say. For we have no other way to speak of origins and beginnings than to use temporal comparisons, no other way to speak about this without using spatial terms, even if we don't know for certain what all of it means. Another point I want to make here, when physicists employ words and images and ideas and metaphors and analogy, they are actually using language very similar to the way that religious heritages use language, the way artists use language. They're creating mythic narratives to describe the world and its nature and what happens in it. Yes, mythic. Not in the popular sense of a myth being false, but in the sense of the way that myths convey truths in ways that engage the whole person, emotion, imagination, intuition, as well as intellect and investigation. As does art, including poetry. And so at this point I want to present again the poem I opened with, perhaps it will resonate in fresh ways now. Rippling skies. I turn my eyes. The sky ripples, canopy of lights glowing, red, growing, slowing, dying, already dead. Seeds in the cinders of stars, worlds of worlds in an ember. Every pregnant ash, a fullness of empty vastness, a point of ripening intensity, density of verdant heat, explosive power. Every burst births a cycle, expanding, despanding, unspanding, respanding, expanding again, universes begetting universes. Beside, within, before, after are the words that we agree to use, as if we know. Words are flotsam, floating atop inscrutable, unfathomable seas, teeming with creatures frolicking with gleeful disregard for the laws of our pragmatic, reassuring, necessary grammar. But really? Really? Every world is a where with no there, and a there with no where, in a when with no then, a then with no when. We live as we live because we must live as if we live in place and time, with these people and plants and pets and problems, as if all of this, in fact, works the way it seems to work, the way we need it to work, need to believe it works in order to set foot outside a door on a winter morning or to see and name in wonder a setting sun. Because this is the only way I can live, as this I who lives this way. But really? Really? I carry in myself and am myself carried by. Universes begetting universes. Expanding, despanding, unspanding, respanding, expanding again. Every burst birthing in a cycle, a density of verdant heat, explosive power, a point of ripening intensity, a fullness of empty vastness. Every pregnant ash, worlds of worlds in an ember. Seeds in the cinders of stars, already dead, slowing, dying, red, growing, a canopy of lights glowing in the rippling sky. I turn my eyes. I said above that at the end of the day, the language used in physics and in religion ends up being more similar than we might normally expect. In addition, there will always be things we just don't know and can't know, at least not with the type of knowing that results from reasoning or experimentation or logic or the type of certainty popularly assumed to come from such ways of knowing things. And referring to this specific question of what happened before the Big Bang, Will Kinney, professor of physics in the University of Buffalo College of Arts and Sciences, says we actually don't know anything about what came before the inflation, and it's doubtful that we'll ever know. Ultimately, the answer to that question pushes us beyond the reach of science, at least at this stage of things. Now I can hear someone say, "Aha, I see, Kevin. Now you're going to say this is where faith comes in and religion and yada yada." Well, not exactly. In the next episode, I do plan to explore some aspects of all of that. When I sit at table, as it were, alongside the religious heritages and bring quantum theory to sit with us and try to make sense of it all, but probably not in the way that some might expect. So how? Well, I guess as a bit of a prequel of my own, since I've been using that metaphor, I would just note as one example that to explore next is the fact that quantum theories and, say, Buddhist and Hindu thought, or at least versions of those anyway, because there's a great variety of Buddhist and Hindu thinking, seem to be very much in sync with each other. There's aspects in both of them, for example, not just both Buddhist and Hindu thought, but those along with quantum theories of the world and the universe. There's aspects in both which suggest repeated cycles of ending and beginning, this world and perhaps many worlds. As I say, that's just one example. sort of an appetizer, I guess. There's a lot more to say about all of that, and I plan to do so in the next episode. So, until next time.